having me. I'm so excited to be here sharing all of my knowledge about Ed Rising with this prestigious group, and I'm just grateful for the opportunity. So let's get started. So first off, I want to start this presentation by acknowledging that I am not a paid spokesperson for Educators Rising. I do not work for Educators Rising. This is merely something that has been a passion project of my own for the past 4 years. And so I want to share with you up front, I am not selling anything. I am sharing what I have learned in the last 4 years in the hopes that we collectively can come together and talk about how to solve all of these very challenging, nuanced teacher recruitment issues that we're all dealing with at the moment. But I want to start off by saying that I am a firm believer that we cannot talk about recruitment and ignore our retention issues, right? I am not talking about retention today, but I do a ton of professional development, a ton of work with teachers, a ton of work with teacher leaders, and a ton of work with administrators around how do we support our staff during these challenging times. That is not what I'm talking about today, but I would feel inauthentic if I didn't acknowledge that I 100% understand that retention is a major part of the teacher shortage conversation. Today, I am focusing solely on recruitment. But I also want to take a moment just to mention from a retention standpoint that I am so grateful to all of you. Clearly, you're invested. Clearly, you care about your staff. And have had to make impossible decisions in the last 2 years and under impossible circumstances due to polarizing rhetoric about our profession, et cetera. These are not easy times. And I was very grateful. I'm going to embarrass him for a moment. I can't help myself, but I know I just saw his name on the participant list. And I was so fortunate to work for an incredible leader by the name of Dan Kaiser, who is on this call. And I don't think sometimes administrators and principals understand the impact they have on educators. And as an early career educator, when I met Dan in, I don't know, Dan, what was it? It was maybe 10, 12 years ago. I was so fortunate to have an administrator who gave me, meaningful observation feedback and who was very supportive when I had big ideas and who gave me opportunities to try new things and fail and try again. And I would be remiss if I didn't mention Dan while I was on this call to start, because I am here 100% because of the support of him. And so I know that so many of you are working overtime to support your teachers and your staff at this time when it's so challenging, and you're trying to keep students and staff safe while also appeasing parents and taxpayers in your communities. And I know that is no easy task. And so please know that your work doesn't go unrecognized and that we are very, very grateful for that. So you're the best, Dan. All right, on to recruitment. So I wanted to start today by just kind of getting us to reflect, to kind of hone in on this conversation around teacher recruitment. And I want you, if you'll just indulge me for a moment, I'd like you to think back to like your childhood, your experiences as a student. And I want to know, when did you know that you wanted to be an educator? What was the moment when you knew you wanted to be a teacher or an administrator, whatever your trajectory into your current role was? When did you know that you wanted to be an educator? And what I found when I asked this question is I typically, I get the what I anticipate is I do get the camp who says, oh, I've been playing, classroom since I was in 3rd grade, and my parents were educators, and I knew that I wanted to be an educator because my parents were educators. And we certainly have that group, right? But I've also found, especially as of late, that there is a large population of educators who go, I was never going to be an educator. I didn't want to be in the classroom. I didn't think I'd ever be a teacher. And then through some ridiculous turn of events, maybe they got a degree in history and then decided, well, what am I doing with my history degree? And then they go back and they get a master's in teaching so they can teach history or whatever it may be. We have that camp as well, right? And I think it's important for us to reflect on those experiences because they are often the experiences of the students sitting in front of us in our classrooms and our buildings. And we need to think about, what are we doing as a profession to advocate for our profession and to get them to think about education as a long-term profession for themselves. So this is where I share where my journey into education. If you had told me in high school that I was going to be a teacher, let alone one day Illinois Teacher of the Year, I would have laughed in your face. I had no desire to go into education. I had amazing teachers who empowered me and made me feel seen and valued and heard within the classroom, and who empowered me to write and to really come into my own. But I actually had, in high school, I never thought I would be a teacher. I pursued a degree in speech communications from SIU Carbondale, go Salukis, because I thought that I wanted to I thought I wanted to be a speechwriter for politicians. And I learned really quickly that working with kids was a whole hell of a lot more fun than working with politicians. More on that later. But so I was not one of these who thought that I would ever be a teacher. And it was kind of this random event that led to my journey into education. I just graduated from SIU with a bachelor's in speech writing and speech communication. And I was this broke college kid who had a semester to kill before I made my way to Springfield, as I thought I would do. And I remember having this semester to kill. I saw an ad in the paper that there was a teacher's aide position at a Southern Illinois middle school in a classroom that they needed an aide. And I thought, well, how, and I share this and I cringe when I share this, but I was one of those who thought, well, how hard can it be teaching kids, right? You're just babysitting a little bit, right? I hate sharing that with you, but I was totally one of those. And I remember telling my mom about it, and she said, well, I think that'd be good for you to, figure things out, make a little money before you make your way to Springfield. And so I remember, I remember showing up on day one. I applied, I had a degree. They said, yep, you got the job. And I showed up on day one in this silly Ann Taylor suit that my parents footed the bill for because I was a broke college kid with no money. And I'll never forget walking into the very first classroom that I would be working in. With an incredible teacher whom I'll call Mrs. O. And I'll never forget, I walked in the door in my silly white Ann Taylor suit, and Mrs. O was at the whiteboard in jeans and a t-shirt, and she turned around and looked at me and went, oh, sweetie. And then I learned that I was actually an aide in a BDED classroom, a self-contained classroom where students were navigating all kinds of behavioral and emotional challenges. And I share this to say, I could not have been more underprepared for my first day in education. And then the students came, and I knew nothing about their lives, the music they liked, the movies they watched, the community they lived in. I knew nothing. And shame on me. But I just couldn't have been more underprepared. And yet, in that semester, in that special classroom with those incredible kids, that is where it changed the course of not only my profession, but like my entire life. By the end of the semester, working with those kids, I knew, oh, I missed some opportunity here to see what this is all about. And in an environment that would admittedly send most adults running for the hills, I fell in love with teaching. And then I kind of suffered this grief at the end of the semester because I was only supposed to be there a semester. And I felt like, wow, like, how did I miss my calling? How did I never consider teaching, until now that I've gotten this bachelor's from SIU? And I felt like I'd missed my calling, and I had a decision to make at the end of the semester, and I chose to stay for a second semester. And then by the end of the second semester, I knew that I had made a mistake and that I wanted to be a teacher. And I immediately enrolled in a master's program, which I'm still paying for. I enrolled in a master's program, and I got a master's in teaching and with an emphasis in secondary education, and spent the last 16 years in education, 13 of which were at Dwight Township High School under the great leadership of Dan Kaiser, teaching junior and senior English. And it's the greatest joy of my life. And I think about so much, like, what if I hadn't like acted on a whim to kind of inquire what teaching was about and what it was like. And when I say I would have missed my calling, and when I say that now I eat, sleep, and breathe education, and I cannot imagine not being an educator. It is anyone who knows me personally knows it's in my blood. And so I think back on this. I share this not to be self-indulgent. I share it to say there was a missed opportunity for me to experience teaching. And I almost missed my calling. And so cut to 2018, where life changed overnight when I was named the 2018 Illinois Teacher of the Year. I didn't even know there was an Illinois Teacher of the Year. And they said, you've got to pick a platform. And I thought, well, what am I passionate about? And this was pre-pandemic. I was passionate about teacher recruitment. And so I had some really cool opportunities to travel the country and to see what other states were doing to tackle their teacher shortage issues. And that is where I learned about Educators Rising. And I was out in California, and I was visiting a classroom, and I remember walking into this high school classroom where they were piloting this new curriculum within a high school to create pathway courses to feed their teacher prep programs in higher ed. And I was just blown away by this teacher who was teaching future educators. And it was kind of like this elective course that juniors and seniors were taking. And I instantly was just like, what is this? I need to know everything about it. And I spent the next couple of months educating myself after that trip to California about what Educators Rising was. And so again, I want to reiterate, I am not a paid person for Ed Rising. I do not work for Ed Rising, but this is a passion project. And now as the director of early career development for the Illinois Education Association, which is like the one role in IEA that's perfect for me, because I don't have to engage in policy too much. I just get to work with aspiring educators and future teachers, which is my greatest joy. Now I get to do a lot of work around this and around, researching recruitment efforts. And so I learned about Ed Rising out in California. And essentially, when I came back to Illinois, I started asking around, and I said, well, do we have Ed Rising here? And they said, well, we have some clubs. And then I also learned about some phenomenal grow your own work that was doing in other pockets of the state. But what I noticed was that even the great work, it was being done in silos. And this was problematic because, I spent the year asking, and this is no knock to FFA or FCCLA or Future Business Leaders of America, but I kept asking, again, pre-pandemic, why are we not investing collectively as a state in teacher recruitment? Why are we not approaching teacher recruitment as the same way as Future Farmers of America, as Future Business Leaders of America, as FCCLA? Why are we not investing and approaching teacher recruitment in the same collective way? And that caught ISBE's attention. And kind of the history of Ed Rising, and I'll just give you a brief overview of Ed Rising Illinois. In 2018, I started advocating. So this has been, it's been a labor of love for the past 4 years. But eventually we ended up in the budget twice, and we were on the governor's desk in March of 2020 for funding, and then COVID happened. And you want to talk about sheer devastation. It was a lot, but what came out of that was they said, well, let's go ahead, let's get you your CTSO status. And for those of you who are familiar with CTSO, that means Career and Technical Student Organization, which means we are one of the newest career and technical student organizations through ISBE, which is a really big deal, because in a minute, I'm going to talk about Ed Rising and the framework. And there are 2 options for Ed Rising Grow Your Own pathway programs. One is the club curricular model, one is the club model, but the other is the curricular model. And one of the things that sold me on Ed Rising from the jump was I got to look at the curriculum that was written by teachers, many of whom I know, award-winning teachers from across the country, but it was written by teachers for teachers. It is scalable and customizable, all of which I'm going to talk about. And their academy curriculum, again, there's the club option as well, which I'm also going to discuss. But their academy curriculum is a high quality introduction to teacher preparation, which can be scaled down to middle school and high school to 1-year or 2-year programs. And I'm going to talk more about that in a bit. And I was just sold. And so ISBE said, we're going to make you a CTSO, which means that schools can now access Perkins funding and career CTE pathway funding if they are interested in creating their own pathways. So how does this apply to you? Well, I cannot tell you how many meetings I've been in the last 4 years where I've been in rooms full of like major stakeholders in Illinois education, and they're all debating, how do we solve, and now, especially after the pandemic, how do we solve these teacher recruitment challenges in our state. And typically I find there are two camps, right, that kind of butt heads. And there's the camp of desperate. I mean, I have heard a desperate administrator in a room full of people say, you don't understand how bad it is in Southern Illinois. I cannot get special ed teachers at this point. Like I am recruiting warm bodies in a classroom. It's that dire, right? And then you have the camp who says, well, we cannot compromise the integrity of teacher preparation in our efforts to solve this problem, right? All, which are valid. Ed Rising was the first thing I ran into where I was like, okay, I think this is something we can all get behind. And it doesn't have to be controversial. It doesn't have to replace things that are already existing that are working in your districts, but it's something that can be added to things that are working and customized to fit pathway programs, right? And it is fantastic for people who are interested in starting their very first pathway program. Teachers don't have to reinvent the wheel. And I just am so eager to share this with all of you because I've had a lot of administrators reach out recently and say, how do I start this? So the big deal about us being a CTSO is now basically districts, ROEs, they can access Perkins funding or CTE pathway funding through ISBE to buy the curriculum to start their own pathway courses, which is really exciting because up until this point, we've been operating kind of really under a club model in our state, which is great. I'm still promoting the club model. And just under that club model, we held our very first in-person Ed Rising conference 2 weeks ago at ISU. I had zero budget. And I basically reached out to all of my teacher leader friends, former Illinois State Teachers of the Year, my buddies at ISU, and I said, we have to do something to start getting young people excited about teaching. And they said, we're in. We hosted our very first conference 2 weeks ago at ISU with zero budget. And we had over 400 high school kids who showed up with their teacher advisors, either the club or the curriculum model. And I am confident we'll have double that next year. And so we are growing. This is kind of a really like teacher-led movement. And now, we have some exciting things happening. Just a little side note before I dive in to the logistics of Ed Rising. We are currently up for $400,000 worth of funding. And if we get that $400,000 worth of funding, I will be able to gift this Ed Pathway curriculum to every single middle school and public school in the state so that they have the tools and resources they need to develop their own pathway programs for 2 years. And so if you're in the policy world and you're in the midst of advocating for legislative session, please give us a shout out because we're fighting really hard to get this funding. And if we don't get it this year, I'm going to be reaching out to all of you to say, let's get this across the finish line. And I'm confident we will. All right, so let's talk more about Ed Rising and about teacher recruitment challenges. So these are the things I'm hearing from the field, right? Fewer students showing interest in teaching, a lack of diversity. We know that our profession should be as diverse as the communities in which we teach. And unfortunately, that is not the case. We know that 80% of our teaching profession is white women, where I'm a dime a dozen, and which suggests that we need to do a better job, not only of recruiting from within the communities in which we teach. And I have some data to support that as well, but also making access into our profession more equitable. And this is something I know a lot of higher ed people don't want to hear, but when we get pushback from higher ed about scholarship opportunities, but most importantly, dual credit opportunities, that's a big roadblock for so many of our students, not to mention the fact that in other professions, students have paid internships, whereas we have student teaching where not only are students working for a semester, but in many places, they are not allowed to work jobs. I spoke with a gentleman in my Aspiring Ed program last week who called me at 10 o'clock at night in tears because he just realized that he's going to be student teaching next fall and that he won't be able to go to school and work nights at the hospital where he's been working for the past 2 years to support his family. That's a real conversation we have to have. And if you're wondering what my next big challenge is, it's going to be, hey, let's talk about paid student teaching, or at least some financial incentives for students who are entering the profession who cannot afford to take a semester off of work to student teach. And I know I get pushback from the crowd who says, well, we had to do it. Well, what's been done, the status quo isn't working when it comes to teacher recruitment. So we've got to start having some real conversations around that, but that's for another day. Shortages in key content areas, wide variance across prep programs. Again, we have different grow your own things happening in other pockets of the state, but this is the first CTSO collective ISBE supported statewide effort to say, we've got to do something about this. And when we have these grow your own programs operating in silos, there's kind of this limited awareness of footprint, right? People want to know, like, what are they doing in 214? And it's great. And I've had a lot of great conversations with them. They're doing amazing work. But I'm really interested in trying to scale the great work that's being done. And I think Ed Rising is how we do that. Moving on. So as far as our partners and our sponsors, we come with a whole gamut of really, great organizations. PDK and Ed Rising, they're kind of the hub of Ed Rising. We are supported by National Board. All of our curriculum, the Intro to Education curriculum, is supported by National Board and aligned to standards. We also have National Board certified teachers who do all of our, when students join Ed Rising, either the club or utilizing the curriculum through a course, they get access, they create an online account, and they have access to all of the Ed Rising resources, many of which include National Board certified teachers teaching lessons. And that's one of my favorite parts about our online community, is that students can see National Board certified teachers in action. We are supported by AFT and IFT. We are supported by NEA and IEA. We've worked with Digital Promise to come up with our micro credentials, which I'll talk about in a little bit, which get a lot of Scooby-Doo ears going up because they offer the potential for dual credit opportunities. So more on that in a bit. But my two, again, Illinois State Board of Ed, we are fully supported by them, and we are fully recognized CTSO now, which is just super exciting because it makes us feel like a legitimate organization as leading this teacher recruitment challenge. And then also near and dear to my heart, the Illinois State Teachers of the Year organization down in the bottom right. Before we really were on ISBE's radar, I went kind of just devastated to my Teacher of the Year family and said, guys, this is such good stuff. How do we get this moving? The world of bureaucracy moves at a glacial pace. I need help. And they said, let's do this. And it started as a grassroots effort of us reaching out to great teachers throughout the state saying, let's kind of be thought partners on this and figure out, what does this look like and how can we grow this? So I share that just to say we have some really incredible partners and sponsors. And then our community. So again, this is scalable down to the middle school level, but lots of interest from the high school level. I've had a lot of people who have pre-existing Ed Pathway courses that are interested in learning more about our curriculum. Some are replacing their old, some are combining it with what they've been doing. Again, it's customizable and scalable. College students, we currently in the collegiate space, we have a lot of college students who are working with Ed Rising as well, and helping to advocate for the profession. Teachers, administrators, I am the state coordinator for Illinois, mainly because I was the person who came back to Illinois and was like, we have to start doing this. And so they said, well, it's you. And at some point, I don't know that I will, that's a lot of work. It's a lot, it is a second job really, and not one that I'm compensated for, but again, a labor of love. And I'm happy to be a part of the Ed Rising family and to create this Ed Rising Illinois. And then higher ed, of course. So higher ed has been reaching out nonstop for the past 4 years saying, what is this? How can we help? Because obviously they have their own interests in feeding their teacher prep programs. And I'm really working with them to try to figure out what those articulation agreements look like so that we can start making access into our profession more equitable through dual credit opportunities and scholarship opportunities. And then just movement supporters in general. A little bit about our history. So in 37, the NEA established Future Teachers of America. So we were formerly Future Teachers of America. And then PDK International, which I'm sure you're familiar with, we rebranded as Future Educators Association, FEA. Then in 2010, we joined the National Coordinating Council of Career and Technical Student Organizations, which was what allowed Illinois to recognize us as a CTSO. In 2015, we rebranded and transformed from FEA to Educators Rising. And then in 2017 is when they started the beginning to teach micro-credentials and the Ed Rising Academy curriculum. And so again, I'm going to be talking about both the club model, which is pretty easy to implement. So if you're somebody who is overwhelmed by all of the information that I'm about to share, that is A-okay. the club model is where you should begin. But if you're somebody who's saying, I have this grant money for a pathway course and I'm ready to get rolling, we can talk about the Ed Rising Academy curriculum as well. But ultimately, we're trying to figure out who is going to be the next generation of teachers we're all counting on to educate and empower our students. It's a really poignant question, and we have to approach it as a profession collectively. We cannot simply continue doing what we're doing in silos. Another interesting statistic is that it's actually over 60%. I think the new number is 62. 60% of educators teach within 20 miles of where they grew up. And if that's not valuable evidence, if that's not an important statistic to justify the need for some kind of a grow your own, or I like to say pathway course program, or just a pathway program in general with a club, this to me justifies the importance of doing this work within our communities, because as we know, Illinois, we are a diverse state. And as somebody who's lived in rural communities, who's lived in the city, who's lived in the burbs, there are very different challenges that we're all trying to solve. This, again, is something that I think is customizable and scalable, but also, suggests that we need to be recruiting from within those communities where we teach. And the other thing I've learned, and I'm super passionate about this, is that teacher leaders are essential in this movement. And here's what I mean by that. When we want to get kids excited about teaching, we want the people that, the veteran teachers who are still on fire for teaching. That's who we want leading this charge in our districts and in our buildings. Okay, so I want you to think about like your staff makeup. You're aware, you know your employees, your staff, and the people who are struggling and who need a little extra support. The people who hate their jobs and are counting down the days to retirement. We do not want them leading this charge. And then the rock star teachers who eat, sleep, and breathe education and who are on fire for kids, that just want to make the experiences of students in our classrooms the best part of their day, right? Those are the people we want leading this charge. So that's it. And I also have had some questions around certification to teach pathway courses. There's some kind of a rumor going around that you have to be CTE certified. And I checked with Jen Kermes at ISBE on that. That is not true. Teachers need to have, I believe, and there's a whole list, but I believe recently I was told they have to have a master's in teaching, and that if they have a master's in teaching, then they are able to teach these classes. And so I wanted to go ahead and right that wrong, that there was misinformation floating around about, well, they have to be CTE certified. That is not true. And I checked with Jen on that. But we want people, think about the teachers in your building. I always think back to, I used to teach, Dan will remember this. I had taught an elective Shakespeare course for seniors years ago. And the guidance counselor did all of our scheduling. She was overwhelmed at how these kids want to take Shakespeare. And they would say, well, we don't really, they'd come to day one in the class and they'd be like, well, we don't really care about Shakespeare, Miss J, but you're teaching the class and we heard you'll get us through it, right? Make it fun. And I don't tell that to be self-indulgent. I tell that to say, we want the teachers who, kids want to be in their classrooms. Those are the teachers we need sharing the good news about our profession. And so teacher leaders are essential. And think about those teachers in your districts who can help build a club if you're interested, or if you're going to implement some kind of pathway curriculum. Those are the people we want teaching courses. Those are the people we want leading clubs. And so our pathway is it's a community-based model. So we have chapters and clubs as an option. We also have schools, again, that have grant funding or just have the funds to purchase the academy curriculum. And then we, I was not prepared for our very first in-person conference 2 weeks ago for the amount of interest we got from students who were interested in competing. So we actually have competitions at our state conference in the spring. The 4 categories that students could compete in this year were children's literature, TED Talk, Ed Rising Moment, and job interview, where they actually submitted a resume and a cover letter and then did a mock job interview with former teachers of the year and then got hired, and feedback from those educators about the interview process. But just, some really cool opportunities. Our conference, we had teachers of the year speaking. We had national board certified teachers there speaking and judging competitions. And I would imagine that after our first year, now that we've got our feet under us a little better, we'll be expanding those competitions, because we were not prepared for the amount of interest in that. But, we're really trying to build this collegiality within the state amongst aspiring educators and future educators. But also, we want to celebrate young people who are devoting their lives to our profession. We want to do like game like signings, right? Just as student athletes, when they sign to go to a school, we have this big press conference, right? We want to do that for people who have said, I'm going to devote my life to kids and to education. And so we're doing a lot of work around that within our community. We are also working again with teacher prep programs in higher ed to figure out, what they need from us in the form of articulation agreements to create dual credit opportunities for kids. And ultimately, I also feel the need to mention, when we talk about diversifying our profession, 51% of Ed Rising students throughout the country are students of color. And so when we think about diversifying our profession, Ed Rising has a history of doing that well, and from recruiting within our communities to do so, which we're really proud of. But our mission is simply cultivating a new generation of highly skilled educators by guiding young people on a path from high school through college and into their teaching careers, and really providing this network of systemic support as they do so, from middle school or high school to higher ed. And by working with aspiring educators who reflect the demographics of their communities and who are passionate about serving those communities through public education, Educators Rising is changing the face of teaching. And I wish you all could experience. You should come next year. Reach out if you're interested. But our conference 2 weeks ago, I feel like I cried. I was so inspired. I cried half the day just by these young people who were just so excited. They're not yet jaded by the politics of education, and they're just really eager to start their journey into becoming teachers. Our vision is a clear pathway in every school district in America for young people who want to serve their communities as highly skilled educators. And we are rooted in these standards. So these are kind of what drive our work: understanding the profession, learning about students, building content knowledge, engaging in responsive planning, implementing instruction, using assessments and data, and then engaging in reflective practice. And I'll talk about all of that in just a bit. The Academy curriculum is rooted in these 7 themes. So we have cultural competence, fairness, equity, and diversity, reflective practice, ethics, collaboration, social justice and advocacy, and self-efficacy. And I also want to add too that the Ed Rising, the Ed Rising Academy curriculum actually has built in really meaningful, authentic clinical experiences. And there are some really cool really cool opportunities to partner with neighboring schools and, elementary schools, middle schools, even higher ed, to create some really cool clinical experiences for students to experience what life is like in a classroom, because all of our students, they know what it is to be a student in our classrooms, but they don't know that feeling, that joy of leading a classroom. And I think back, like if someone had said to me in high school, hey, have you ever thought about teaching? I wonder if that would have changed the trajectory of my path into college. Like, would I then have thought, oh, maybe it is for me, but it just didn't happen. And so we're trying to change that. On another note, we've had a lot of students who have joined the club because a friend says, hey, I'm going to be a future teacher. I want to be a teacher. I joined this club. You should come to this club. And the friend goes strictly because, they're high school kids and easily impressionable and they want to do what their peers are doing. So they go to the club. I can't tell you how many kids I met 2 weeks ago said, well, I came to this club because my friend was in it, but I'll tell you what, I think I want to be a teacher now. And the same is to be said for the pathway curriculum. We've had students who say, well, I took this class because my girlfriend was taking it, but now I think that I want to be a teacher. And so that's another really cool kind of phenomenon that we're experiencing at this time. But we're trying to create partnerships to boost interest in teaching. We're trying to boost partnerships with college admission and teacher prep programs. And again, those scholarship and dual credit opportunities. So students, whether you have, if you're interested in Ed Rising, please make sure you reach out, and I've got my email address down there. I can make it easy on you. But the club model is super easy to implement at your school. It literally requires identifying a teacher advisor who is willing to host the club. Students go online, they create their online accounts, and then they have access to all of these really cool, they have a virtual campus that they have access to. And then, teacher advisors have the wherewithal to run the club as they would any other club. We have a lot of places where they're doing like They are working to partner with the community to do philanthropy projects. There's some great work being done by Brooke May in the southern part of the state, in the Vienna area, where I'm actually keynoting an event they're doing on Friday, where they have a club model, but they're doing this teacher leadership academy thing, an outdoorsy event that I'm going to be attending, which is really cool. But students also get access to this virtual campus, and they have all kinds of resources and a free online community, which includes national board certified teachers teaching millions of videos. It's really solid. They have a network of other aspiring educators from across the country whom they can kind of interact with and bounce ideas off of. And it's just a really cool online network, as well as a teacher leader community for the teacher leaders. But this is something we're quickly developing some of a reputation for, and that is our micro credentials. So should you go the academy curriculum route where you are interested in building a pathway in your district, one of the things that we're really well known for are these micro credentials in anti-bias instruction, classroom culture, collaboration, formative assessment, and learner engagement. And I've seen some other parts of the state doing some really cool work with higher ed around, dual credit opportunities around just strictly these micro credentials, which you can also, it requires some negotiating with Ed Rising, but you can also strictly purchase micro credentials for those opportunities. And each micro credential submission requires approximately 5 to 15 hours of work by students. And they submit all of their artifacts into their online profile, their online account, to acquire those micro credentials. And so it's usually in 3 parts. They have some kind of an overview with questions about teaching context, an essay maybe about prior experiences that they've had, and then they submit their artifacts, be it lesson plans, observation notes, and then a video of them teaching like a mock lesson, either to their peers or maybe to an actual group of students in some kind of a clinical experience. And then part 3 is an even longer reflection about those artifacts and about the teaching experience. So again, those micro credentials are in anti-bias instruction, classroom culture, collaboration, formative assessment, and learner engagement. And then as far as training teacher leaders who are going to, if you go the academy curriculum route, there is a 3-day teacher leader training that prepares teachers to utilize the plethora of resources. And I have been down the academy curriculum rabbit hole, and it takes days. But for instance, like every theme or every unit has a PowerPoint for introductory day, and then lessons that are scalable to a 1, 3, or 5-day lesson. All teaching standards are embedded in those lessons. They are aligned to national board standards. They have links to videos, essays, articles, things that can help facilitate discussion within classrooms about teaching. When I say it is phenomenal, it's phenomenal. And I wish I could show it to you, but I signed a non-disclosure agreement, so I can't just share it out. But I would not be here for no pay doing this if I didn't believe in the academy curriculum. And when I say it's phenomenal, it really is. And so Ed Rising also prepares their teachers to teach the classes with a 3-day leader training, where they go through the teacher leader handbook, access curriculum guides, lesson plans, clinical experience ideas, and then of course access to the micro credentials online. And they go through how students submit artifacts to acquire those micro credentials. But again, this is all about getting high school or middle school students invested. And again, we're mainly seeing this at the high school level, but getting them interested and invested in teaching, and really getting them to buy into, the fact that this is the most noble of noble professions. And so in addition, the 3-day teacher leader training, it basically orients them to the purposes and goals of Ed Rising. It prepares them for those quality experiences. And it also, there's a whole network of teacher leaders helping to lead this movement and to lead this charge in their states. So it also provides that kind of collegiality and camaraderie with other teacher leaders, but we do help prepare them. And I wanted to make sure I said that. And we also take them through curriculum maps, expectations, and recommendations, and kind of go over like what a year at a glance looks like, so that they're not just gifted this curriculum and left flailing. They do not have to reinvent the wheel, and we help support them as they prepare to plan for their courses and their curriculum. So next steps. This is kind of the point where, I always say, If you're interested in learning more about Ed Rising, please first reach out to me. My email is illinoisteacheroftheyear@gmail.com, and I will answer any questions you have. And if I don't have those answers to those questions, I can definitely get in contact with people who do. But I always say, start with, what are you wanting to build? Do you want to build the club model? Because we can do that by tomorrow. Or do you want to implement, are you building a pathway course and partnering with higher ed to create these opportunities for your students? And then that is another conversation. I'm just going to be upfront again and say, I'm really hoping we get this $400,000, which just allows me to gift the curriculum to every public school in the state. But until then, there is kind of a process of, reaching out and talking with Albert Chen, our Chief Operating Officer, about the curriculum and kind of the size for your district. And then he has those conversations, but I can help facilitate that for sure. For the club model, it's $10 per student for the year. That gives them access to our conference. For teacher leaders at the club model, it's completely free. It just requires students and teachers going on, creating their online accounts. If students want to pay the $10 for themselves, they can, or if the school wants to cover the cost of that $10 for each student for the club model, they can also do that. I could take you through the curriculum process, but it's a little bit longer of a conversation. And again, I'd rather do that one-on-one. But that is our club model. It's $10 per student. And we are really moving and shaking with this club model, which I wasn't prepared for, but was very pleasantly surprised by 2 weeks ago with our in-person conference. The 5 crucial considerations I ask that you take away from this are that this is by teachers for teachers. There is no reinventing the wheel for either the club model or the curriculum model. So if you are interested in creating your pathway course or just building your club and getting kids jazzed up about teaching, I'll tell you what, I don't know how to do a lot of things, but I know how to get people excited about teaching. And so I'm just really grateful to lead this charge. And I have other amazing teacher leader friends throughout the state who are helping to lead this work. It is aligned with a professional continuum. It's customizable for your students and your community needs, which vary, right, by geography. It's relevant for teacher leaders and rising educators, and it really is an introduction to quality teacher preparation. And if it weren't, I wouldn't be here today sharing this with you. When I speak, I always end with this. And when I think about, the teaching profession, there are so many people telling young people, why would you go into teaching? There are so many people telling young people there are a million other professions that you should consider, right? And I even experienced this. I shared earlier on in the when I started this video, this chat, that I had gone out to California, and that is when I learned about Ed Rising. And ironically, I left and I was on fire for education. I was so excited to come home and share the good news about Ed Rising with Illinois. And I boarded my plane home. I'd been gone from my students for a week, I was homesick and missing them in ways I can't even explain. I sat down next to this well-to-do looking woman, and I turned to her. We struck up a conversation, and I asked what she did for a living. And she was the CEO of some big company that I won't share. And then eventually she asked me what I did for a living. And I said, I'm a teacher. I teach high school English, and it's the greatest joy of my life. And her expression changed, and I'll never forget it. She looked at me and she said, high school? Teaching? I could never teach high school brats all day. And she said it like that with gusto. And I was really offended by that reaction, her just being so dismissive of our profession. And so I ended the conversation shortly after. And it was on that plane ride home that I did what it is that I do when I'm really frustrated. And that is that I write. And I wrote the following poem, which I'm going to end with. And it's called Aches on a Plane. And it goes like this. You teach high school? She said as she turned up her nose. You bet, I exclaimed. They're the ones that I chose. But they're jaded and awful. You must be insane. They use cuss words, hate school. They're incredibly vain. They're unruly, conceited. They think school's a game. If you ask them to write, they will grimace in pain. They sing songs that are stupid. I mean, Gucci Mane. They can't get along, enter class with disdain. Apathetic and lazy, they cannot be tamed. Teaching high school, my dear, tell me, what do you gain? So I take a deep breath and I smile with grace, resisting the urge to slap her square in the face. It's a condo I know all too well, I must say, though the face of my critic changes from day to day. See, it's not about me, I quickly insist. And the truth is, I actually love teaching kids. There's Bubba the Brave. He's enlisting in June. And Lucy's a singer. She's always in tune. There's Josh, the artist. He paints pretty pics. There are wrestlers and cheerleaders and self-proclaimed hicks. And Jimmy and Abby, they act on the stage. And Faith is a reader consuming each page. There's Brooklyn, a leader. She's happy and kind. And someday on Andrew's cuisine, I will dine. There's Morgan, the golfer. She just might go pro. They use silly expressions like, hey, sup, bro. They are funny and witty and reckless and wild. And I desperately love every sweet, precious child. So to answer your question, just what do I gain? The answer is simple. I gain everything. And that is the narrative I hope we have around teaching. That is the narrative we need around teaching. And that is a poem I share with every young Ed Rising member I get the privilege of speaking to whenever I get to go chat with them. So if you're interested in learning more about Ed Rising, please contact me. Again, my email address is there, IllinoisTeacherOfTheYear@gmail.com. If you just like to learn more about Ed Rising and set up a one-on-one Zoom call, I would love that. I feel like I do a number of those a week. Just if you want to learn more and inquire and ask questions, I'm happy to set up one of those. Just reach out and let's get either a club or some academy curriculum in your districts and help lead this charge. Thank you so much for the opportunity to be here. And I suppose if there are any questions, Arlen, I can take those at this time.
Wonderful. Lindsey, thank you so much for sharing this awesome information and for closing with such a great poem. That is terrific. What a great closure to a great webinar. Let me look and see. I saw some questions. One question was, will the slides be shared after today's presentation? I'll leave that up to you, Lindsey.
Sure. Yeah, I can definitely share these with you, Arlen. I'll just email it. I'll share it with you. My Google slides. I'll just add you to this and you can share it out accordingly. Is that all right?
Perfect. I will send it with the recording.
Sure, perfect.
To all the registrants and participants. Vicki said, I would like information about attending the conference next year with students. Any information?
Love that. Yes. So I'll tell you what, even if you're you need to mull this over, please, if you're interested in learning more, please just, if nothing else, send me an email with your email address and I will add you to our list of contacts. So I send out updates. We have monthly teacher leader meetings that are super fun. Some people are just joined because they want to learn more about the club model or whatever. We have a monthly meeting though. And also I send out resources and updates. So if strictly nothing else, you want to be just added to that list to get updates, please just send me an email and I will add you to my contact list and you'll get all of those updates.
That is perfect. Seeing a lot of praise here in the chat for you, Lindsey. Lots of thank yous. Great poem. Enjoyed this webinar. Appreciate all the kudos that everyone's typing in the chat. We do have plenty of time for any questions. If you want to ask a question on the microphone, all you have to do is raise your hand from the toolbar at the bottom, and then I will be able to enable or allow you to speak on the microphone. Here we go. We've got Dan Kaiser with his hand in the air. Dan, I'm going to allow you to talk. I hope I don't regret it.
You will not regret that, Arlen.
Dan's my fave. So good to hear you.
You too. Great presentation, Lindsey.
Thank you.
I wanted to know, all this is so great. And of course, that my passion is for preparing rural students as well for these types of programs. Has there been any approach or any kind of discussion with area career centers for these types of programs for kids?
Yes. So I've had a lot of different area career centers reach out wanting to learn more about the academy curriculum. But, and the challenges are different. And Dan, I know you know this. Like I have some area career centers that are working with high schools who have huge budgets who are like, let's just purchase the curriculum, right? But then you also have area career centers that are working with places like Dwight, right? Where trying to build a pathway course in Dwight with a population of, 200 students, that's a real challenge, but they can rock and roll with the club model. But the area career centers have done a ton of reaching out. And I do have a couple throughout the state who are re-examining their current curriculum. And a few have purchased the academy curriculum to revamp some of their efforts, to impact teacher recruitment. So, but definitely, that's a viable audience and somebody who I've had quite a few area career centers reach out and done a lot of Zoom calls with them so that they can learn more about whether or not an academy model is better for them with the curriculum or promoting the club model. Yeah.
Great. Thanks. Good information.
Dan. So good to talk to you.
You too.
Awesome. Thank you, Dan. As Dan just did, you can raise your hand with the toolbar and I can make it available for you to unmute your microphone. Lindsay, we did get another question in chat from Sonia. She says, Lindsay, what role might a regional office of education take in this initiative?
Sure. Oh, that's a great question. You know, and I've tried to do an okay job. I feel like ISBE has kind of helped to promote this through Dr. Ayala's. She mentioned us in her newsletter a while back that I know goes out to ROEs and administrators. You know, we've been promoting, but I've had ROEs reach out and say, you know, we want to build a pathway course. What do we need to do? And then usually we set up some kind of a Zoom call to talk about, you know, what scaling the academy curriculum looks like. But ultimately, what I would ask from ROEs is make educators in your, you know, your regions aware of this opportunity. And if you're just looking for kind of an easy lift to start to get kids interested in teaching and in education, the club model is where it's at. Share out, hey, if nothing else, I want a club in every high school in the state. I want an Ed Rising club. It's an easy lift. It's no cost. And, you know, it gives kids who are looking for some kind of a sense of belonging at a time in their lives where they're cultivating identity and future aspirations. It gives us the opportunity to say, hey, how about teaching, right? And I think about like, if that had existed when I was in high school, maybe I would have chose teaching earlier. And so if nothing else, just promoting, I'm always real hesitant to promote the curriculum because I know that's not viable for everywhere, particularly in rural places such as where Dan and I work. But if nothing else, the club model is an easy lift. And then those teacher leaders who are leading the clubs, you know, there are, again, we want them to be excited about teaching, but it's a very easy lift to just identify, you know, an inspiring educator and to say, would you sponsor a club? And we are a student-led organization. So we have state officers. This is not intended to be more work for advisors, but merely like an opportunity to empower students who are either considering teaching or who know they want to become educators. So my ask would be that ROEs promote this opportunity and promote the club model to kind of get so that districts can kind of, and schools can figure out who we are, what we're about. And then of course I meet monthly with all of the advisors and we just have check-ins and talk about what everyone's doing to promote teaching and education in their, you know, in their buildings. And our teacher leaders, like I wish I had the time to let them jump on and share the things they're doing. Oh, and by the way, I'm rambling, but if there's a Cadillac model of Ed Rising, it is Aurora University. They partnered with 16 high schools, and all of those high schools have clubs, nothing else. The club model, and those 16 high schools are feeding their teacher prep program at Aurora. Pam Ferdinand is doing amazing work at Aurora, and was kind of one of the first people I met when I came back to Illinois and said, have you heard of Ed Rising? And we met and instantly bonded. So there are so many, just, you know, like I said, the club model is where I would start. And then that would be my ask, is that ROEs that could share the good news about Ed Rising with, you know, out with their buildings, their districts, and let's get a club in every high school and we'll start from there. That would be great.
Wonderful. Thank you, Lindsay. Sonia asked a follow-up question. Does it matter if students are enrolled in alternative schools or programs?
You know, not that I'm aware of, Sonia. If anything, as the state coordinator, and somebody who worked in an alternative setting to start my career, which I think completely impacted my lens on education and on teaching in a really positive way. I would not deny any student who wanted to be a part of the club or who wanted access, you know, if they wanted to implement a pathway academy curriculum course. Absolutely not. Yeah, I wouldn't have any issues with that whatsoever.
All right. Let's see. Dan just posted, Aurora University is currently one of the best in the state for building the administrator pipeline as well. They are doing great things there. So appreciate that, Dan, for that tip on Aurora. Here's something from Cynthia. Thankful that there is an organization to promote teaching. Great to get students an inside view and positive conversations regarding education. I love the poem. Can you share it, please? Is there a way, Lindsay, I could get the poem out to
sure. Sure. Everybody's like, you got to put that in writing somewhere, and I've just never done it, but I can share that with you when I share my slides, Arlen. And if I forget, just remind me and I'll type it up real quick.
Perfect. All right. I don't see any other questions in chat. Thank you for everyone who came and asked questions and listened to Lindsey here this afternoon. This was recorded. I will be stopping the recording here soon and getting it out to all registrants tomorrow. And if you are an Illinois participant, make sure to look for the evaluation, the online evaluation. If you complete that, you can get 1 clock hour for professional development credit for attending today's webinar. Thanks again, everyone. Lindsey, thank you so much. Everyone is free to go.
Thank you so much.
Yes, appreciate it. Everyone is free to go down to the toolbar in the lower right-hand corner and leave the room. And we will see you all at the next webinar. Thanks so much, everybody.